The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. On the other end, a hospital nurse delivered the words that would shatter everything. His sister Caroline, 7 months pregnant, found at the bottom of the stairs. Coma, critical condition. Her billionaire husband stood in the hospital hallway.
I'm not afraid of you, Marcus.
Cashmere sweater, perfect concern on his face. The devoted husband, the grieving father-to-be. But Ethan noticed something no one else did. Bruised knuckles, hidden under expensive sleeves. Everyone looked at Ethan and saw a man in a wheelchair. Slurred speech, twisted body, someone to be pitied, someone to be dismissed. They never saw what was underneath. 7 years at the National Security Agency, top-level clearance, a mind sharper than any weapon. Marcus Blackwell had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the wrong brother. This is the story of how a disabled man brought down a billionaire and exposed a monster hiding behind a perfect mask. This story carries a powerful truth that we all need to remember. Never judge someone by what you see on the outside. The person in the wheelchair might be the smartest one in the room. The quiet one might be the strongest. And the one everyone underestimates might be the one who changes everything. Abuse thrives in silence. It survives because victims feel alone, because witnesses look away, because powerful people buy their way out of consequences. But silence can be broken, truth can be exposed, and justice, even when it seems impossible, can still be achieved. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know this. You are not alone. Your story matters. And there are people who will believe you. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. Ethan's hand knocked over his medication bottles, reaching for it. Pills scattered across the nightstand. Small white tablets rolling onto the floor. The sound of plastic against wood. Then silence. Then the ringing again. His fingers found the phone. The screen was too bright. His eyes struggled to focus. An unknown number. Portland area code. Hello? His voice came out thick, slurred. It always did when he first woke up. The cerebral palsy made his tongue feel heavy, like it belonged to someone else. Is this Ethan Mitchell? A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. The kind of careful that meant bad news was coming. Yes? Mr. Mitchell, this is Portland General Hospital. I'm calling about your sister, Caroline Blackwell. The room tilted. Ethan gripped the edge of his mattress. His legs wouldn't cooperate. They never did, but now his whole body felt frozen. What happened? Sir, your sister was brought in approximately 2 hours ago. She's in the intensive care unit. Severe trauma. The doctors are with her now. Trauma? The word didn't make sense. Caroline was pregnant. 7 months pregnant. She was supposed to be home, safe, decorating the nursery in yellow, because Marcus wanted blue, but she insisted on yellow. Sir, I think it's best if you come to the hospital. Is there someone who can drive you? Ethan looked at his wheelchair folded against the wall, at his leg braces hanging from the closet door, at the apartment that Caroline had helped him modify 3 years ago so he could live independently. I can drive myself, he said. I have an adapted van. Of course. Please come to the main entrance. As for the ICU waiting area. And Mr. Mitchell? Yes? The baby is stable for now, but please hurry. The line went dead. For a moment, Ethan sat in the darkness. The medication bottles were still on the floor. His phone screen had gone black. Somewhere outside, a car alarm wailed and then stopped. He reached for his leg braces. The drive to Portland General took 43 minutes. Ethan's adapted van had hand controls for acceleration and braking. Caroline had researched for months to find the right modifications. She had test-driven 6 different systems before choosing this one. She had sat beside him during his first nervous attempts at highway driving. She had never given up on him, not once. Rain streaked the windshield, The wipers beat a steady rhythm, back and forth, like the heart monitor he imagined at the hospital, beeping, steady, alive. His phone buzzed. A text message. He glanced at the screen. Sam Parker, his former colleague from his days at the agency. They still kept in touch. She had access to systems that regular people didn't know existed. The message read, "Saw the police report, flag. What happened?" Ethan didn't answer. Not yet. He needed to see Caroline first. He needed to understand. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. His wheelchair lift hummed as it lowered him to the concrete. The sound echoed off the walls. Lonely, mechanical. He wheeled himself toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open. Fluorescent lights flooded his vision. Everything looked pale, washed out, like color had been drained from the world. A nurse approached. She had the face, the one they must teach in nursing school. Soft eyes, gentle voice, the bad news face. "Mr. Mitchell? Where's my sister?" "I'll take you to the ICU waiting area. The doctor will be with you shortly." "I want to see her. Sir, the doctors are still working, but I can tell you what we know so far." They moved through hallways that smelled of antiseptic and fear, past rooms with closed doors, past machines that beeped and hummed, past life and death separated by thin walls. The nurse spoke as they walked. Her voice was steady, professional. "Your sister was brought in with severe trauma, swelling on the brain, 3 broken ribs, a ruptured spleen, significant internal bleeding." Each word was a hammer blow. Ethan's hands tightened on his wheelchair rims. "The baby?" "Stressed but stable. We're monitoring closely. The next 24 hours are critical." "What happened to her?" The nurse hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for Ethan to notice. Her husband said she fell down the stairs. Stairs? The word hung in the air. Heavy. Wrong. Caroline had grown up in Maine. She had navigated ice storms every winter since she could walk. She had hiked Mount Katahdin at 4 months pregnant without a single stumble. She had spent her whole life being careful, being sure-footed, being strong, and now someone wanted him to believe she had fallen downstairs. "Her husband," Ethan said slowly. "Where is he?" "Mr. Blackwell is in the waiting area. He's been here since the ambulance arrived. He's very concerned." They rounded a corner, and there he was. Marcus Blackwell stood at the end of the hallway, 6'3", broad shoulders, silver at the temples that made him look distinguished. Rather than old, he wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. His face was arranged in perfect concern, the devoted husband, the worried father-to-be. He turned when he heard the wheelchair. "Ethan." His voice was warm, rich, the voice that had charmed investors and board members, and Ethan's own sister. "Thank God you're here. She's going to need her family." Ethan stopped his wheelchair 3 feet from his brother-in-law. He looked up at the man who towered over him, the man who had everything. Money, power, respect, the man who had married Caroline 2 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Marcus's face crumpled. Perfectly. Like he had practiced it. "I don't know. I was in my study. Working late. I heard a crash. I ran out and found her at the bottom of the stairs. She wasn't moving." His voice cracked. "I called 911 immediately. I did everything I could." Ethan watched him, studied him. His years at the agency had taught him to read people, to notice what they didn't want him to see. Marcus's sweater sleeves were pulled down past his wrists, unusual for a man who usually rolled them up. His hands were hidden, shoved into his pockets. "Can I see her?" Ethan asked. The doctor said to wait. but they'll let us know soon. Marcus stepped closer, put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The concerned brother-in-law. I'm so glad you're here. She would want you here. Ethan nodded, said nothing, but he noticed. When Marcus reached out, his sleeve rode up. Just an inch, just for a moment. The knuckles on his right hand were bruised, red and swollen, the kind of marks that came from hitting something hard, or someone. Marcus saw him looking. His sleeve dropped back down immediately. His smile didn't waver. Coffee? He asked. It's going to be a long night. Ethan's stomach turned. His mouth tasted like metal. No, he said. I'll wait here. Marcus nodded, squeezed his shoulder, walked away toward the vending machines. Ethan sat in his wheelchair in the fluorescent light. His body was twisted and slow. His speech was thick and difficult. People looked at him and saw weakness, limitation, someone to be pitied. They never saw what was underneath. They never saw the 7 years he had spent at the National Security Agency, the classified operations he had worked on, the systems he had breached, the secrets he had kept. They saw the wheelchair. They heard the slurred speech. And they made assumptions. Marcus had made the same assumption. It would be his biggest mistake. The doctor came at 4:42 in the morning. She was young, tired. Her scrubs had spots of blood on them. Caroline's blood. Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Blackwell? Marcus materialized from somewhere. His coffee cup was empty. His concerned expression was fully in place. How is she? He asked. How is my wife? The doctor looked at both of them. Her eyes lingered on Ethan for just a moment. Something flickered there. Recognition, concern, or maybe just exhaustion. Mrs. Blackwell is stable but critical. We've induced a medical coma to reduce the swelling on her brain. The surgery to repair her spleen was successful, but the next 48 hours will be crucial. And the baby? Ethan asked. The baby is showing signs of distress, but is stable for now. We're monitoring continuously. The pregnancy is at 7 months, which gives us good viability if we need to deliver early. If we need to deliver early, the words echoed in Ethan's mind. His sister in a coma, her baby fighting to survive, because of stairs. Can we see her? Marcus asked. Briefly, she won't be responsive, but sometimes patients can hear their loved ones, even in a coma. The doctor paused. One at a time, please, and be prepared. She has significant bruising and swelling. Marcus went first. Of course he did. The devoted husband. Ethan waited in the hallway. His phone buzzed again. Sam. Ethan, talk to me. What's going on? He typed back slowly. His fingers didn't always cooperate with touchscreens. Caroline is in ICU. They say she fell downstairs. 3 dots appeared. Sam was typing. Fell? Or was pushed? He didn't answer, but he knew. Somehow, he already knew. When it was his turn to see Caroline, Ethan almost couldn't go in. She lay in the hospital bed like a broken doll. Tubes in her arms, machines breathing for her. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, purple and black and yellow. Her left eye was completely hidden by inflammation. The bruises on her arms were finger-shaped. Ethan wheeled himself to her bedside, took her hand. It was cold, lifeless. I'm here, he said. His voice cracked. Caroline, I'm here. The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed, but Caroline didn't move. Ethan looked at her wrists, at the marks that didn't match a fall, at the pattern that told a story no one wanted to hear. His sister had not fallen. His sister had been beaten, and the man who had done it was standing in the waiting room, drinking coffee and playing the grieving husband. Ethan leaned close to Caroline's ear. His speech was slow, careful but certain. I know, he whispered. I know what he did, and I promise you, Caroline. I promise on Mom's grave. He will pay for this. Her finger twitched, just barely, a tiny movement that could have been nothing. But Ethan felt it. She had heard him. The morning light came gray and cold through the hospital windows. Ethan had not slept. He sat in the waiting area, his wheelchair parked in the corner, watching Marcus perform his role. The concerned husband made phone calls, spoke to doctors, accepted sympathetic hugs from friends who arrived with flowers. No one questioned his story. No one looked at his knuckles. No one asked why a woman, who had never fallen in her life, had suddenly tumbled down a staircase. Ethan's phone buzzed. Sam again. I ran a preliminary check. You need to see this. He typed back. Send it. The files arrived moments later. Court records that should have been sealed, financial documents that should have been private, the kind of information that regular people couldn't access. But Ethan was not regular people, and neither was Sam. He scrolled through the documents, his stomach twisted tighter with each page. 2 previous girlfriends. Both had ended up in emergency rooms with mysterious injuries. One had a broken arm from falling off a ladder. The other had a concussion from hitting her head on a car door. Both had received large cash settlements. Both had signed non-disclosure agreements. And then there was Diana Mercer, Marcus's first wife, married for 3 years, died in a car accident 7 years ago. The driver of the other vehicle was drunk. Case closed. Except the accident report had inconsistencies. The angle of impact didn't match the witness statements. The drunk driver had no memory of the accident and had always maintained his innocence. And Diana had been 2 months pregnant when she died. Ethan stared at the screen. His hands were shaking. Not from his condition. From rage. His phone buzzed again. Sam's message was short. Diana Mercer isn't dead. She's in hiding, and she's been waiting 7 years for someone to believe her. Dr. Rebecca Holloway found Ethan in the hospital chapel. He wasn't praying. He didn't know how, but the chapel was quiet, private, a place where no one would overhear. Dr. Holloway was 55 years old, kind eyes, careful hands. She had been Caroline's obstetrician for 2 years. She had monitored every checkup, every ultrasound, every concern. Mr. Mitchell, she closed the door behind her. I need to speak with you privately. About Caroline? About a pattern. She sat in the pew across from him. Her hands held a folder, medical records. Ethan could see the hospital logo on the cover. Your sister was very careful about which hospitals she visited, Dr. Holloway said. Never the same one twice. Always emergencies far from home. She opened the folder, showed him the pages inside. 4 emergency room visits in 2 years. The first was 18 months ago. A broken wrist. Caroline had said she fell off a ladder while hanging curtains. The second was 14 months ago. Bruised ribs. She claimed she had been in a minor car accident. The third was 9 months ago. A concussion. She said she had hit her head on a kitchen cabinet. The fourth was 5 months ago. Severe bruising on her torso. She had attributed it to a fall in the shower. Each visit was at a different hospital. Each explanation was plausible on its own, but together, they formed a picture that Dr. Holloway had seen too many times before. I tried to talk to her. The doctor said, last month during her prenatal appointment. I asked if everything was okay at home, if she felt safe. What did she say? She said she was fine. She said Marcus was wonderful. She smiled and changed the subject. Dr. Holloway's voice was heavy, but her eyes told a different story. Ethan looked at the medical records, at the documentation of his sister's pain, at the evidence that had been hiding in plain sight. He had visited Caroline a dozen times in the past 2 years. He had seen her at Christmas dinners and birthday parties. He had watched her laugh at Marcus's jokes and lean into his embraces. He had never seen the truth, because he hadn't wanted to see it, because it was easier to believe that his sister was happy. that she had found her fairy tale, that the billionaire who swept her off her feet was everything he appeared to be. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. "I knew something was wrong," he said slowly. The words came out thick and heavy. "I felt it. I saw the signs, and I did nothing." Dr. Holloway reached across the aisle, touched his hand. "You couldn't have known," she said. "Abusers are experts at hiding, and victims are experts at protecting them." Why would she protect him? Because she loved him, because she was afraid, because she thought she could change him. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. Because leaving is the most dangerous time, and she probably knew that. Ethan thought about his sister, about the woman who had raised him after their mother died, who had worked double shifts to pay for his therapy and his college and his dreams. Caroline had always been the strong one, the caretaker, the protector, and now she lay in a hospital bed, broken and silent, while the man who had destroyed her walked free. "What can I do?" Ethan asked. Dr. Holloway looked at him for a long moment, at the wheelchair, at the twisted body, at the man everyone underestimated. "Find proof," she said, "because his lawyers will bury anything that isn't airtight, and then make sure the whole world sees it." Ethan returned to Caroline's room. Marcus was gone. A nurse said he had left to handle some business. Important calls. Couldn't wait. The room was quiet, except for the machines. Beep, hiss, beep, hiss. The rhythm of life being sustained by technology. Ethan wheeled himself close to the bed, took Caroline's hand again. "Remember when Mom died?" he said softly. "You were 21. I was 18. The doctor said I would never live independently. They said I would always need full-time care." The machines continued their steady beat. "You told them they were wrong. You said I was the smartest person you knew. You said my body might be broken, but my mind was perfect." His voice cracked. "You fought for me, Caroline. You never stopped fighting." Her hand was still, cold. "Now it's my turn to fight for you." He pulled out his phone, called Sam. "I need everything," he said. "Every shell company, every offshore account, every NDA he ever paid for, every woman he ever hurt. That's going to take time and resources. I have time, and I have you." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then, "This is personal for you. He hurt my sister. He almost killed her baby. He's been doing this for years, and no one has stopped him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So, yes, it's personal. I'll start digging. But Ethan?" "Yes?" "Be careful. Men like Marcus Blackwell don't lose. They destroy anyone who tries to take them down." Ethan looked at his sister's battered face, at the tubes keeping her alive, at the monitor showing the baby's heartbeat. "Then I'll have to be smarter than him." The flashback came without warning. 6 months earlier, Caroline's birthday dinner at Marcus's estate. The dining room was enormous. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork on the walls. A table that could seat 20, but held only 3. Carolyn wore a long-sleeved dress despite the July heat. Ethan had noticed, but hadn't questioned it. Pregnant women got cold, he had told himself. It was normal. She laughed at Marcus's jokes, smiled when he touched her shoulder, but something was off. Her laugh was too quick, too loud. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And when Marcus's hand landed on her arm, she flinched, just for a moment. Just a tiny movement that most people wouldn't notice, but Ethan had noticed. He had told himself it was nothing. Pregnancy nerves, hormones, the stress of impending motherhood. He had let himself believe the lie because the truth was too terrible to consider. Now, sitting in the hospital room, the memory burned like acid. He had seen the warning signs. He had felt that something was wrong, and he had looked away because looking closer was too hard. Caroline had needed him, and he had failed her. That failure would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he could still make it right. He could still get justice for his sister, and he would not look away again. Morning press conferences were Marcus Blackwell's specialty. He stood outside Portland General Hospital at 9 o'clock sharp, perfectly groomed, perfectly dressed, a slight tremor in his voice that conveyed just the right amount of grief. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Marcus raised his hand for silence. As many of you know, my wife Caroline was in a terrible accident last night. His voice broke beautifully. She fell down the stairs at our home. She's currently in critical condition. Ethan watched from the hospital window. His wheelchair was positioned in the shadows where no one could see him, but he could see everything. Our baby is stable but stressed, Marcus continued. We're asking for privacy during this incredibly difficult time. All I want is for Caroline to wake up. All I want is to hold my wife and tell her how much I love her. A reporter called out, "Mr. Blackwell, can you tell us what happened?" Marcus shook his head sadly. It was dark. She must have misjudged the stairs. By the time I heard the crash, she was already at the bottom. He wiped his eyes. I called 911 immediately. I did everything I could, but seeing her like that... He couldn't finish the sentence. Perfect. The reporters ate it up. Sympathetic murmurs, supportive nods. The billionaire philanthropist was a victim of tragedy. His beautiful, pregnant wife had suffered a terrible accident. No one questioned the story. No one looked at his knuckles, which were now covered by carefully chosen sleeves. No one asked why a woman who had never fallen in her life had suddenly become so clumsy. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Is this Ethan Mitchell? Caroline's brother? He typed back carefully. Who is this? My name is Diana Mercer. I was Marcus's wife. 7 years ago, he beat me so badly I needed facial reconstruction surgery. Then he tried to kill me and made it look like an accident. Ethan stared at the screen. His heart was pounding. I thought you were dead. That's what everyone thinks. That's what kept me alive. A pause, then, I've been waiting 7 years for someone to believe me. Can we talk? They met in the hospital chapel. Neutral ground. Private. Diana Mercer looked nothing like the photos Ethan had found online. The woman in those old society pages had been blonde, delicate features, a shy smile that photographers loved. The woman who walked into the chapel was different. Darker hair, sharper cheekbones, a face that had been rebuilt from the bones up. But her eyes were the same, haunted, watchful. The eyes of someone who had seen the monster behind the mask. You survived, Ethan said, barely. Diana sat in the pew across from him. Her voice was quiet, controlled. He beat me for 3 years before he finally tried to kill me. The night it happened, I was 2 months pregnant. What happened? He found out I had talked to a divorce lawyer, that I was planning to leave. Her hands clasped in her lap, white-knuckled. He lost control completely. When he was done, I couldn't see out of my left eye. I had 4 broken ribs, internal bleeding. Ethan felt sick. The pattern was so clear now, so obvious. He put me in the car himself, Diana continued. Said he was taking me to the hospital, but he took a different route, a back road near a cliff. She paused. The other driver was a man named Gerald Patterson. Marcus had paid him $50,000 to get drunk and run me off the road. He was supposed to kill me and then claim it was an accident. But you survived. The car went off the cliff. Gerald's car followed. He died on impact. I was thrown through the windshield. Diana touched her face. The scars were faint now, hidden by years of surgery. I spent 6 months in a hospital in Mexico. Another year in recovery. By the time I could function again, I was already dead. Dead? Legally dead. Marcus had the body identified as mine. Dental records, can be manipulated when you have enough money. The case was closed. The grieving husband moved on. Ethan processed this. The scope of Marcus's deception was staggering. Not just abuse, not just attempted murder, a complete cover-up involving falsified records and paid conspirators. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Diana laughed. It was a bitter sound. "I did. 3 times, different jurisdictions, different years. Each time the investigation went nowhere. Witnesses recanted. Evidence disappeared. The investigating officer on my original case now works for Marcus's security company. He bought them. He buys everyone: judges, prosecutors, journalists, anyone who might be a threat." Diana leaned forward. "That's why I've been waiting. I have documents, medical records, financial transfers, a recording of him admitting what he did." "A recording?" "From the night he tried to kill me, he didn't know I'd started keeping evidence. Insurance." Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. "I've kept it hidden for 7 years. Waiting for proof that he did it again. Waiting for someone he couldn't discredit." Ethan understood then why she had reached out, what she saw in him: the disabled brother, the man in the wheelchair, the one everyone underestimated. Marcus could discredit a former wife who had supposedly died. He could discredit angry ex-girlfriends with settlement money. But how would he discredit a grieving brother who was simply trying to protect his sister? "He doesn't know you're alive?" Ethan asked. "No, I changed everything. Name, face, history." Diana's jaw tightened. "I've spent 7 years building a new life while watching him destroy others. Every time I saw him, on a magazine cover or a charity gala, I wanted to scream. But I knew I needed to wait. I needed someone else to expose him. And now? Now your sister is in a coma, and I'm done waiting." The hospital garden was quiet at midday. Ethan wheeled himself along the paths between flower beds. Rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. A bird was building a nest in the eave above, carrying twigs one by one, patient, methodical, determined. He watched it work, thought about his mother. Grace Mitchell had been a fighter, a single mother who had worked 2 jobs to support her children. She had never complained, never given up. Even when Ethan's condition meant endless doctor visits and expensive therapies. "Your body may be slower than others," she used to say, "but your mind is faster. Use what you have." She had died when Ethan was 18. Cancer? Fast and brutal. Caroline had been 21, just finished with college, ready to start her own life. Instead, she had come home, taken over the bills, handled Ethan's care, put her own dreams on hold to make sure her little brother had a future. She had given him everything. And when she finally found her own happiness, when she finally met someone who made her laugh and dream, Ethan had been so grateful that he hadn't looked closely enough. He had wanted her to be happy, so he had convinced himself she was. Now she lay in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, and the man who had put her there was giving press conferences about his grief. The bird finished placing another twig, flew away to find more. Ethan's phone buzzed. "Diana. He's going to try to move her. I've seen him do this before. Get the victim to a private facility where no one can ask questions." "When?" "Soon. He has lawyers drawing up the paperwork now. Medical power of attorney. He'll claim it's what she would want." Ethan thought about Caroline, about the woman who had fought for him his whole life, who had never given up, never stopped believing. She wouldn't want this. She would want to fight. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Get proof? Real proof. Something his lawyers can't bury. Something the whole world will see." "I have a contact. Former agency. She's already digging." "Good. But you need to move fast. Once he has her in his facility, it's over." Ethan looked at the bird, at the nest that was slowly taking shape, one twig at a time. How fast? 3 days, maybe less. 3 days to bring down a billionaire. 3 days to expose a man who had been hiding his crimes for over a decade. 3 days to save his sister. It seemed impossible, but Ethan had done impossible things before. "I'll be ready," he said. Marcus returned to Caroline's room at 3 o'clock. He brought flowers, orchids, expensive and elegant, the kind of flowers that looked impressive in photos. Caroline hated orchids. She had told Ethan once that they reminded her of funerals, cold and waxy and artificial. Marcus didn't know that. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. "You should go home," he told Ethan. "Get some rest. I'll stay with her. I'm fine here." "Ethan." Marcus's voice was gentle, patient, the concerned brother-in-law. "You've been here all night. You need to take care of yourself. Caroline would want that." Ethan looked up at him, at the perfect hair, the perfect clothes, the perfect mask. "I'm not going anywhere." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Annoyance, quickly hidden. "Of course," he smiled. "Whatever you need. We're family, after all." He moved to Caroline's bedside, touched her face, gentle, loving, the devoted husband. Ethan watched his hands. The bruised knuckles were fading now. In another day or two, there would be no visible marks at all, just like there were never any visible marks on Caroline. Not where anyone could see them. Marcus leaned down and kissed Caroline's forehead, a perfect gesture of tenderness. Ethan's stomach turned. He pulled out his phone under the blanket on his lap. Typed a message to Sam. "I need everything by Friday. He's planning something." Her response came quickly. "Already on it. You won't believe what I'm finding." Marcus straightened up, checked his watch. "I have some calls to make," he said. "Business that can't wait, but I'll be back in an hour." "Take your time." Marcus paused at the door, looked back at Ethan. His smile was still in place, but his eyes were cold. "I know you love your sister," he said. "We all want what's best for her." "Yes," Ethan replied. "We do." Marcus left. His footsteps faded down the hallway. Ethan turned back to Caroline, to the monitors and tubes and machines keeping her alive. "I know what he is," he said quietly, "and I'm going to stop him. I promise." The machines beeped their steady rhythm, but Ethan could have sworn he saw Caroline's hand twitch again. She was still in there, still fighting, and so was he. Detective Vivian Cross had been on the force for 23 years. She had seen domestic violence cases before, hundreds of them. She knew the patterns, the excuses, the way victims protected their abusers and abusers charmed their way out of trouble. But she had never seen a case quite like this. She arrived at the hospital at 9 in the morning, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes tired but sharp, a notebook in her hand that had seen better days. "Mr. Mitchell?" She pulled up a chair across from Ethan's wheelchair. "I'm Detective Cross. I'm investigating your sister's accident." "It wasn't an accident." Cross's expression didn't change. "What makes you say that?" "The bruises on her wrists are finger-shaped. Her medical history shows 4 previous emergency room visits in 2 years. Her husband's knuckles were bruised the night she was admitted." Cross wrote something in her notebook. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately. "Mr. Blackwell's statement says she fell down the stairs. My sister grew up in Maine. She's navigated ice storms her whole life. She hiked mountains during this pregnancy. She doesn't fall down stairs." "People do fall, Mr. Mitchell, especially pregnant women. Their center of gravity changes. They become unsteady." Ethan leaned forward. His voice came out slow and careful, fighting the slur that always got worse when he was emotional. "Look at her injuries. Look at where the bruises are. Look at the pattern. Cross studied him for a long moment, at the wheelchair, the twisted posture, the speech that marked him as disabled. She made a decision. Ethan saw it happen. The slight closing off, the subtle dismissal. I appreciate your concern, she said. Mr. Blackwell has a spotless reputation. He's donated millions to domestic violence shelters. He's on the board of 3 charities that help abuse victims. That's not irony, Ethan said. That's a cover. Cross closed her notebook. We'll continue investigating, but unless we find evidence of wrongdoing, there's nothing actionable here. What about the previous ER visits? Accidents happen, Mr. Mitchell, especially to busy people. What about the NDA payments to his former girlfriends? Cross paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What NDA payments? 2 women received settlements from Marcus Blackwell in the past 5 years. Both had been to emergency rooms with suspicious injuries. Both signed non-disclosure agreements. How do you know this? Ethan met her gaze steadily. I know how to find things. For a moment, something shifted in Cross's expression, a crack in the professional facade, but then it closed again. I appreciate the information, but without those women coming forward, there's nothing I can do. She stood. I'm sorry about your sister, Mr. Mitchell. I truly am, but I need evidence, not speculation. She left. Ethan sat in the empty waiting room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped its steady rhythm. He pulled out his phone, called Sam. I need to meet you, now. The diner was 3 miles from the hospital. Cheap coffee, plastic booths, the kind of place where no one looked twice at a man in a wheelchair having lunch with a woman in a rumpled jacket. Sam Parker slid into the booth across from him. She was 34 years old, dark hair cut short, eyes that missed nothing. They had worked together at the agency for 4 years. She had been one of the few people who never treated Ethan differently because of his condition. She judged people by their minds, not their bodies. I've been digging all night, she said. She slid a laptop across the table. Blackwell Enterprises is a maze. 12 different shell companies across 6 countries. Money flowing in and out like water. What about the women? 3 separate NDs that I've found so far. $2 million each for their silence. Sam's jaw tightened. The contracts are airtight. If any of them talks, they lose everything and face criminal prosecution. Can you find them? I already did. One is in Seattle, one is in Boston. Neither will talk to me. They're too scared. Ethan thought about this. $2 million was a lot of money, but fear was worth more than any amount of cash. What about Diana's accident? Sam pulled up another file. The investigating officer was a guy named Patterson. No relation to the driver, by the way. He closed the case in 3 weeks, ruled it a tragic accident. Let me guess, he got promoted. 6 months later, and his son got a full scholarship to Yale. Anonymous donor. Ethan's hands tightened on the table edge. The corruption ran deep. Every path led to a dead end blocked by Marcus's money. There has to be something, he said. Something he couldn't buy his way out of. Sam hesitated. Then she leaned closer. There might be, but it's risky. Tell me. Marcus has a security system at his estate. State-of-the-art, cameras, everywhere, including the bedroom, including the night your sister was hurt. Ethan's heart rate spiked. He recorded it? He records everything, paranoid about security, but those files are stored on a private server with military-grade encryption. Can you access it? Maybe. The system was installed by the same contractor who did the NSA building in Maryland. I know the back doors. Sam's voice dropped. But if I get caught, I'm looking at federal charges, and so are you. Ethan thought about Caroline, about the machines keeping her alive, about the baby fighting to survive. Then he thought about Marcus, standing at the press conference, playing the grieving husband, walking free while his victims suffered. "Do it," Ethan said. "Are you sure? He beat my sister nearly to death. He's done it to other women. He'll do it again unless someone stops him." Ethan's voice was steady. "I spent 7 years at the agency analyzing threats and finding solutions. This is what I was trained to do." Sam nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." The woman at the next table flinched. Ethan noticed it without meaning to. Training. Instinct. The automatic cataloging of details that his years at the agency had made second nature. She was young, maybe 30, wedding ring on her finger, coffee untouched in front of her. Her husband sat across from her. Ordinary looking, polo shirt, nice watch, nothing remarkable. But when he raised his voice slightly, when he leaned forward with irritation in his eyes, the woman flinched, pulled back, made herself smaller. She apologized for nothing. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're right. I shouldn't have said that." The husband relaxed, patted her hand. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. But Ethan recognized that flinch. He had seen it in Caroline 100 times. The automatic response of someone who lived with fear, who had learned that making themselves invisible was the safest option. He had seen it and hadn't understood. Now he did. Sam was still talking about encryption protocols and server vulnerabilities, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere. How many women were sitting in diners right now, flinching at raised voices? How many were hiding bruises under long sleeves? How many were telling themselves that the monster they lived with was just stressed, just tired, just having a bad day? And how many would end up like Caroline if someone didn't stop it? "Ethan?" He blinked, focused on Sam. "Sorry, what did you say?" "I said I need 48 hours. Can you keep Marcus distracted for that long?" Ethan looked at the woman across the diner. She was smiling now, laughing at something her husband said. "Playing the role of happy wife." "Yes," he said. "I can do that," said. The memory came unbidden. 2 years ago, Caroline's wedding day. She had been radiant. White dress that she had chosen herself, flowers in her hair, a smile that lit up the entire church. Marcus had spared no expense. Private jets flew in guests from around the world. The reception was at his estate. 300 people toasted the happy couple. Ethan had given a speech. Standing at his wheelchair, voice fighting to be clear, he had talked about his sister's strength, her kindness, her unwavering love. "I know you worry about me," Caroline had said afterward, adjusting his boutonniere. "But Marcus is different. He sees me, Ethan, not just what I can do for him. Me." She had believed it. Completely. Desperately. Because Marcus was good at making people believe. It was his greatest skill. Ethan remembered watching them dance, Caroline's head on Marcus's shoulder, his arms around her waist. The picture of perfect love. He had been so relieved, so grateful that his sister had finally found happiness after years of sacrifice. He had wanted to believe, so he had. And now Caroline was in a coma, and the man who had promised to love and protect her had nearly killed her. She believed in him because she wanted to believe. Because hope is harder to kill than trust. The truth of that settled into Ethan's bones, heavy and cold. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the years of blindness. But he could make sure Marcus never hurt anyone again. That would have to be enough. The parking garage was empty at 9 o'clock at night. Ethan had stayed late at the hospital, sitting with Caroline, watching the monitors, waiting for any sign of improvement. The doctors said the swelling was going down. That was good news. But she was still in the coma, still silent, still fighting a battle no one else could see. He was wheeling himself toward his van when he heard the footsteps. They came from behind, slow and deliberate. echoing off the concrete walls. Working late? Marcus stepped out of the shadows. He was alone, no lawyers, no concerned friends, just him and Ethan and the empty garage. "I've been visiting my sister," Ethan said. "Yes, I noticed." Marcus walked closer. His shoes were expensive, Italian leather. They clicked against the concrete with each step. "I've also noticed other things. The questions you've been asking. The people you've been talking to." Ethan's hands tightened on his wheelchair rims. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." "What happened is that your sister had an accident. A terrible, tragic accident." Marcus stopped 3 feet away, looking down at Ethan from his full height. "That's the official story, and that's the only story. What if I don't believe that story?" Something shifted in Marcus's face, the mask slipping, the charming billionaire disappearing. What remained was cold, empty, predatory. "You think anyone will believe you?" His voice was flat now. No warmth, no performance. The cripple with the speech impediment? Against me? The word hit like a slap. Cripple. Ethan had heard it before. From bullies in school. From strangers who thought they were being funny. From people who saw his wheelchair and assumed they knew everything about him. But hearing it from Marcus was different. Because Marcus wasn't ignorant. He was deliberately cruel. "Your sister understood her place eventually," Marcus continued. "She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to smile and when to cry." He leaned closer. "You'll learn too. I'm going to find out what really happened." "No, you're not." Marcus's smile was thin and sharp. "Because if you do, if you keep asking questions and talking to the wrong people, things might happen. Accidents, tragedies." He paused, let the threat hang in the air. "Did you know your sister's baby is still at risk? Premature delivery, complications. So many things can go wrong in a hospital." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I would hate for anything else to happen to your family." Ethan felt cold, real cold. The kind that started in your spine and spread outward until your whole body was ice. Marcus was threatening the baby, his own child. The life that Caroline had been protecting with her own broken body. "You would hurt your own child? I would protect my reputation, at any cost." Marcus straightened up. The mask slid back into place. Concerned husband, loving father, perfect gentleman. Think about that, Ethan. Think very carefully about what you want to do next. He walked away. His footsteps echoed through the garage, then silence. Ethan sat alone in the darkness. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from rage. Marcus thought he had won, thought that his threat would be enough to silence a man in a wheelchair. Thought that Ethan would back down like everyone else had. He was wrong. The next morning, Ethan found Caroline's room full of lawyers. Thomas Ashford stood at the foot of the bed, 55 years old, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He was Marcus's personal attorney, had been for 15 years. He had buried more scandals than most people would ever know about. "Mr. Mitchell," he held up a folder. "We need to discuss your sister's care." "What about it?" "Mr. Blackwell has concerns about the quality of treatment at this facility. He believes Caroline would be better served at a private medical center. Better specialists, more personal attention." Ethan felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what Diana had warned him about. Moving Caroline somewhere private, somewhere no one could ask questions. "She's stable here. The doctors are excellent. That may be true, but as her husband, Mr. Blackwell has the authority to make decisions about her care." Ashford opened the folder. "He has medical power of attorney. Caroline signed it 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Right after her last emergency room visit. The one she blamed on falling in the shower." Ethan looked at the document. Caroline's signature at the bottom. Shaky, uncertain. The signature of someone who was afraid. This isn't what she would want. With respect, Mr. Mitchell, you don't speak for your sister. Mr. Blackwell does. Ashford's smile widened slightly. The transfer will happen at the end of the week. Friday at the latest. Friday. 3 days away. I want to consult with her doctors, Ethan said. Of course, but ultimately, this decision rests with her husband. We're all on the same side here. We all want what's best for Caroline. The words were smooth, reasonable, the perfect cover for what was really happening. Marcus was going to move her, get her away from the hospital where people might ask questions, take her somewhere private where he could control everything. And then what? Another accident? A complication during transfer? A tragedy that no one could have predicted? Ethan looked at his sister, at the machines keeping her alive, at the baby growing inside her. I won't let you take her, Ashford's smile flickered, just for a moment. Mr. Mitchell, I understand you're upset, but this is a legal matter, and legally, you have no standing here. He closed the folder. I suggest you focus on supporting your sister during this difficult time, rather than making things more difficult than they need to be. He left. The other lawyers followed. Ethan sat alone with Caroline. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. I'm not going to let him take you, he whispered. I promise. Her hand didn't move, but somehow he felt like she heard him. The phone call to Diana was frantic. He's going to move her. Friday, a private facility. Once she's there, it's over. Diana's voice was calm, steady. I know, I expected this. You expected it. It's his playbook. Isolate the victim, control the narrative, make sure no one can see what's really happening. She paused. He did the same thing to me. Moved me to a private hospital after one of the beatings. The staff there were paid to look the other way. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What do I do? You have 3 days. Use them. Sam needs more time for the security footage. Then you need to buy her that time. Keep Marcus distracted. Make him think you've given up. How? Play the role he expects, the helpless brother, the man in the wheelchair who knows his place. Diana's voice hardened. Let him underestimate you. It's your greatest advantage. Ethan thought about this, about all the times people had looked at him and seen only the disability, the wheelchair, the slurred speech, the twisted body. They never saw what was underneath. The mind that had cracked encryption codes. The analyst who had identified threats before they became disasters. The man who had spent 7 years protecting his country while sitting in a chair. Marcus had made the same mistake. He saw a cripple, an inconvenience, a bug to be crushed. He didn't see the weapon. I can do that, Ethan said. Good. But Ethan, yes? Once you commit to this, there's no going back. Marcus doesn't lose gracefully. If he figures out what you're doing, he'll destroy you. Your career, your reputation, maybe your life. Ethan looked at Caroline's hospital room through the window. At the machines, the tubes, the woman who had given him everything. He already took the only thing that matters, he said. Let him try. The alliance formed quietly. Diana brought her evidence. 7 years of documents, medical records, financial transfers, and the recording. Doctor. Holloway provided Caroline's medical history. The pattern of injuries that no one had connected until now. Sam worked around the clock on Marcus's security system, finding vulnerabilities, testing backdoors, getting closer to the footage that would prove everything. And Ethan coordinated it all, from his wheelchair, with his slurred speech, the man everyone underestimated. They met in Diana's apartment, a small place in a building that no one looked twice at, the kind of place where secrets could be kept. Diana spread her documents across the table, Photos of her injuries, hospital records, bank transfers showing payments to the officer who had botched her investigation, and then she played the recording. Marcus's voice filled the room, smooth, confident, terrifying. If you tell anyone, I'll make what happened tonight look like a spa day. You understand? Nod if you understand. A woman sobbing, Diana's voice, 7 years younger, terrified. Please, please, I'm pregnant. I know. That's why you'll keep your mouth shut. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. He knew you were pregnant, Ethan said slowly, and he still hurt you. He hurt me because I was pregnant, because it meant I had something to lose, something he could threaten. Diana's voice was steady, but her hands shook. It gave him power over me. Ethan thought about Caroline, 7 months pregnant, trapped in a marriage with a monster, trying to protect her baby from the man who was supposed to love them both. We have evidence, he said. Medical records, financial documents, the recording. Why isn't it enough? Because he destroyed my credibility years ago. A dead woman's evidence means nothing, and those documents could be dismissed as forgeries. Diana looked at him directly. We need something current, something that can't be denied, something that will make the whole world pay attention. Sam looked up from her laptop. I'm close to getting into his security system. Another 24 hours, and I might have the footage from the night he attacked Caroline. Might? The encryption is military grade. I'm good, but I'm not magic. Ethan nodded. What else do we need? A platform, Diana said. Somewhere to expose him that his lawyers can't shut down. Somewhere the whole world will see. Ethan thought about this, about Marcus's carefully cultivated reputation, his charitable donations, his public image as the perfect husband and philanthropist. The Children's Hospital Gala, he said. Diana and Sam both looked at him. It's on Saturday. 500 guests. Live streaming, all the biggest donors in the state. Ethan's mind was racing now, fitting pieces together. Marcus is giving the keynote speech. He built his reputation on charity, on being the good guy. You want to take him down there? Sam asked. In front of everyone? I want to show everyone who he really is, in the place where it will hurt the most. Diana was silent for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. It could work. If we have the footage, if we can get past his security, if everything falls into place perfectly, then let's make sure it does. Thursday morning, 2 days until the gala. Sam had been working for 40 hours straight. Dark circles under her eyes, empty energy drink cans scattered around her workspace. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the intensity of someone racing against time. I'm in, she said. Ethan wheeled closer to her screen. His heart was pounding. You got the footage? I got everything. He installed cameras in every room, including the master bedroom. Sam's voice was grim, including the night he attacked Caroline. She pulled up the file. The timestamp showed the date. 3 days ago, 11:47 p.m. Are you sure you want to see this? She asked. Ethan nodded. He had to see. He had to know exactly what his sister had endured. Sam pressed play. The footage showed the Blackwell Mansion's master bedroom. Caroline was sitting on the bed. Her pregnancy was visible. Her hands were wrapped protectively around her belly. Marcus entered the frame. He was holding a drink. His movements were slightly unsteady. Drunk, but not incapacitated. I saw your phone, he said. His voice was conversational, calm. You were texting your brother, again. I just wanted to let him know about the baby's appointment. I told you, everything goes through me first. Marcus, he's my family. The glass shattered against the wall. Carolyn flinched, drew back. I'm your family now. Marcus's voice had changed, cold, empty. When are you going to understand that? I do understand. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. You keep saying that, and you keep doing it anyway. He moved closer. His shadow fell over her. Maybe I need to remind you what happens when you disobey me. What happened next was brutal. Ethan watched his sister try to protect her belly, heard her scream, saw Marcus's fists connect with her body, watched her fall, and Marcus grab her and throw her toward the stairs. The fall wasn't a fall. It was deliberate, calculated. Murder disguised as accident. The footage ended with Caroline lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Marcus standing over her, then calmly pulling out his phone and calling 911. His voice was perfect when he made the call, panicked, terrified. The devoted husband who had just found his wife at the bottom of the stairs. Ethan sat in silence. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He threw her, he said. His voice came out as a whisper. He grabbed her and threw her down the stairs. Yes? And then he called 911. Like nothing happened. He's done this before. He knows how to cover his tracks. Sam's voice was flat with controlled anger. But now we have proof. Proof, the word hung in the air. After years of cover-ups and paid silences and buried evidence, they finally had proof. Can you copy this? Make sure it can't be traced back to us. Already done. Multiple copies on separate servers. If anything happens to us, this goes public automatically. Ethan nodded. The rage inside him was cold now, focused, like a blade being sharpened. What else did you find? Financial records. He's been moving money offshore for months. Millions of dollars to accounts that can't be touched by American courts. Sam pulled up another file. He's planning to run. Once Caroline is moved to his private facility, he's going to disappear. And take her with him? Or leave her there? Either way, she'd never be seen again. The scope of it was staggering. Not just abuse, not just attempted murder, a complete escape plan that would leave no witnesses and no evidence. We have to stop him, Ethan said. The gala is in 2 days. Can you hold it together until then? Ethan thought about Marcus, about the threats, about the smug certainty that he would win. I've been holding it together my whole life. 2 more days won't kill me. That night, Ethan sat alone in Diana's apartment. The documents were spread around him, evidence of Marcus's crimes, the recording, the footage, everything they needed to destroy him. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He stared out the window. His reflection looked back at him, the wheelchair, the twisted body, the man the world saw as broken. What am I doing? The thought came unbidden. Marcus is right. I'm nobody. I can barely dress myself some mornings. I couldn't save my mother from cancer. I couldn't save Caroline from him. I can't save anyone. The doubt was familiar. It had followed him his whole life, whispering that he wasn't enough, that his body's limitations defined his worth, that no matter how hard he tried, he would always fall short. He thought about giving up. Out giving, just disappearing. Let Marcus win. Let the powerful continue to crush the weak. What difference could one man in a wheelchair make? His phone buzzed. An unknown number, a video file. He opened it. Caroline appeared on the screen. She looked different. This was from months ago, before the latest attack. But her eyes were swollen from crying. Her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan, if you're watching this, something happened to me. I need you to know it wasn't an accident. It was never an accident. She paused, looked around nervously, making sure she was alone. I'm leaving this with someone I trust, because I know you'll find it. You always find things. You're the smartest person I know, little brother. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to leave. I'm sorry I put you through this. But I know you won't stop until he pays. That's who you are. That's who Mom raised." The video ended. Ethan sat in the darkness. His face was wet. She had known. All along, she had known that something terrible might happen. And she had trusted him to find the truth, to get justice. She believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. He wiped his face, set his jaw. The doubt wasn't gone. It would never be gone. But it wasn't in charge anymore. He had work to do. The team assembled the next morning. Sam had the technical plan. Diana had the evidence. Dr. Holloway would be a witness. And Ethan had something none of them expected. "Detective Cross came to see me last night," he said. Diana's eyebrows rose. "The detective who dismissed you. She's been doing her own digging, off the record. Cases that went nowhere, witnesses who recanted, evidence that disappeared." Ethan pulled out his phone. "She wants to help. Can we trust her? She's been trying to get Marcus for years. Every time she got close, someone shut her down. Money, pressure, threats." Ethan met Diana's eyes. "She's done playing by their rules. What does she need from us?" "Everything we have, and a chance to arrest him publicly, somewhere his lawyers can't interfere." The room was quiet. They all knew what this meant. They were about to take down a billionaire, a man with unlimited resources and no conscience, a man who had killed before and would kill again. "The gala is tomorrow night," Sam said. 500 guests, live streaming, every major donor in the state. "Security will be tight," Diana added. "Marcus will have his own people there, but he won't be expecting us." Ethan looked around the room, at the women who had suffered, at the allies who had emerged from the shadows. He thinks he's already won. That's his weakness. And if something goes wrong, then we release everything anyway. The footage, the documents, the recording. Even if we fail tomorrow, the truth comes out. Diana nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure we don't fail." That afternoon, Ethan visited Caroline. Her room was quiet. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The afternoon sun came through the window and painted patterns on the floor. "The doctors say you're getting better," he told her. "The swelling is down. They might wake you up soon." Her face was still bruised, but the swelling had reduced. He could see her features now. His sister's face, the face that had smiled at him through every challenge of his life. "I have to tell you something," he said. "I found the video you left, the one where you told me the truth." Her hand lay motionless on the white sheets. "I know I should have seen it sooner. I should have asked questions. I should have protected you." His voice cracked. "I failed you, Caroline, and I'm sorry." The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed. "But I'm not going to fail you again. Tomorrow night, we're going to expose him, in front of everyone. The whole world is going to see who he really is." He took her hand. It was warmer now. "Not so cold. I need you to hold on. Just one more day, then it's over. I promise." Her finger twitched, a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but Ethan felt it, and he knew she had heard. Friday. The day before the gala, Ethan hadn't slept. His mind was racing through scenarios, plans and contingencies, everything that could go wrong, and how to prevent it. His apartment was covered in notes, timelines, names, access codes that Sam had extracted from Marcus's security system. The phone rang at 7 in the morning. Detective Cross. "We need to meet," she said. "I have something you need to see." The meeting was at a coffee shop across from the courthouse. Cross looked different out of her usual suit. Tired, older, like the weight of 23 years on the force was finally showing. "I've been a cop for a long time," she said. "I've seen a lot of things I wish I could forget, but nothing haunts me like the cases I couldn't solve. She slid a folder across the table. Marcus Blackwell has been on my radar for 7 years, ever since Diana Mercer died. The accident never made sense to me. The angles were wrong. The witness statements were inconsistent. But the case was closed. I know. My supervisor shut it down. Told me there wasn't enough evidence. Cross's jaw tightened. A week later, he bought a boat he couldn't afford on a detective's salary. Ethan opened the folder. More cases, more women, more suspicious accidents that had been ruled as nothing. These are all Marcus? I can't prove it, but yes, I believe they are. Cross leaned forward. He's been doing this for at least 15 years, maybe longer. And every time someone gets close to the truth, the investigation disappears. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're different. You're not a cop he can buy off. You're not a journalist he can threaten. You're her brother. Cross's voice softened slightly. And brothers don't give up. What do you need from me? The evidence. All of it. The footage, the recordings, the financial documents. Cross met his eyes. Give me that, and I'll make sure he's arrested. Publicly. In front of witnesses he can't intimidate. The gala. 500 people, live streaming. His lawyers won't be able to stop it. Ethan thought about this, about the risk, about everything that could go wrong. How do I know I can trust you? Cross was silent for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a badge. Her badge. She set it on the table. I've given 23 years of my life to this job. I've followed the rules, done everything by the book. And every time, men like Marcus Blackwell walked free because they could afford to. She pushed the badge toward him. Tomorrow night, I'm not following the rules anymore. I'm doing what's right. If that costs me my badge, so be it. Ethan looked at the badge, at the woman who was risking everything. We're going to need your help getting past security, he said. Tell me what you need. The plan came together piece by piece. Sam would handle the technical aspects. Hijacking the gala's audiovisual system. Broadcasting the footage to every screen in the ballroom. Diana would be there in person, ready to reveal herself as the wife Marcus had supposedly killed 7 years ago. Dr. Holloway would provide medical testimony, the pattern of injuries, the evidence of systematic abuse. Detective Cross would have officers standing by, ready to make the arrest the moment the evidence was shown, and Ethan would be the face of it all, the brother who had uncovered the truth, the man in the wheelchair that no one had suspected. What about the other women? Diana asked. The ones who signed NDAs? I've reached out to both of them, Ethan said. They're scared, but they're also tired of being scared. Will they come forward? I think so, once they see they're not alone, once they see that Marcus can actually be beaten. The room was quiet. Everyone understood what they were about to do. Take on a billionaire with unlimited resources. Risk everything for the chance at justice. Any second thoughts? Ethan asked. I've had 7 years of second thoughts, Diana said. I'm done thinking. It's time to act. Sam nodded. I've seen what he did to your sister. There's no way I'm backing out now. Dr. Holloway spoke quietly. I became a doctor to help people. This is helping people. Detective Cross checked her weapon. Let's bring him down. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. The city lights flickered outside his window. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. He thought about his mother, about what she would think if she could see him now. Grace Mitchell had been a fighter. She had raised 2 children alone, worked herself to the bone, never complained, never gave up. Use what you have, she used to say. Your body may be slow, but your mind is fast. He had used his mind for 7 years at the agency, analyzing threats, finding patterns, solving puzzles that others couldn't crack. But he had never used it for something this personal, this important. His phone buzzed. A message from Caroline's hospital room. The night nurse. She squeezed my hand tonight. The doctors say she might wake up soon. Ethan stared at the message. His sister was fighting her way back, clawing her way out of the darkness. He had to be worthy of that fight. He picked up his phone, called Diana. "Tomorrow," he said. "We end this tomorrow. Are you ready?" He looked at his reflection in the dark window, the wheelchair, the twisted body, the man the world underestimated. "I've been ready my whole life." Saturday night, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. 500 guests in black tie mingled with champagne glasses in hand. The cream of Portland society. Donors, politicians, business leaders. And at the center of it all, Marcus Blackwell. He stood near the stage, accepting handshakes and sympathy. The grieving husband, the devoted father-to-be, the generous philanthropist whose wife had suffered such a terrible accident. His smile never wavered. His mask never slipped. Ethan watched from the service entrance. His wheelchair was hidden in the shadows. His heart was pounding. Sam's voice came through the earpiece. "I'm in the AV booth. Systems are ready. Just give me the signal." Diana's voice followed. "I'm backstage. Ready when you are. Detective Cross. Units are standing by. Say the word." This was it. Everything they had worked for. Everything they had risked. All for this moment. Marcus took the stage. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. The live stream counter showed 50,000 viewers and climbing. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus said into the microphone. His voice was warm, sincere, perfect. "As many of you know, my wife Caroline is currently fighting for her life." Sympathetic murmurs from the crowd. "It's been the hardest week of my existence. But she would want me here, supporting the children's hospital that means so much to her." His voice cracked beautifully. "That's who Caroline is, always thinking of others. Even now." More applause, more sympathy. Ethan felt sick. The performance was flawless. The lies were beautiful. "I want to thank all of you for your support during this difficult time," Marcus continued. "Your donations tonight will help children in need. Children who deserve a chance at happiness." He paused, looked out at the crowd with moist eyes. "That's what Caroline and I dreamed about for our own child. A chance at happiness. A life filled with love." The crowd was eating it up. The grieving husband, the noble philanthropist, the victim of tragedy. No one saw the monster underneath. "Sam," Ethan said quietly, "now." The screens flickered. Marcus's speech cut off mid-sentence. His face appeared on every screen in the ballroom, but not the face from tonight. The face from 3 days ago. In his bedroom, drunk and raging. His voice boomed through the speakers. "You think you can text your brother without my permission? Everything goes through me first." Caroline's voice, trembling. "Marcus, he's my family." A glass shattering. The crowd gasped. On screen, Marcus advanced toward Caroline. "I'm your family now. When are you going to understand that?" What followed was brutal, unavoidable, undeniable. The guests watched in horror as Marcus beat his pregnant wife, as he grabbed her and threw her toward the stairs, as she fell and lay motionless at the bottom. Then, most damning of all, they watched him calmly pull out his phone and call 911. His voice perfect, panicked, terrified. "She fell down the stairs. I just found her. Please hurry." The footage ended. The ballroom was silent. 500 people staring at Marcus Blackwell, their faces white with shock. Marcus stood frozen on the stage. His mouth was open. No words came out. Ethan wheeled himself into the center of the room. The crowd parted around him. Their eyes moved from the screens to the man in the wheelchair. "My name is Ethan Mitchell." His voice came through the speakers, slow, deliberate, clear. "That woman on the screen is my sister Caroline, 7 months pregnant, currently in a coma because of the man you had just applauded." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Phones came out, more cameras recording. "For 2 years, Marcus Blackwell systematically abused my sister. He beat her behind closed doors. He isolated her from her family. He made her believe that no one would help her." Marcus finally found his voice. "This is lies. This is fabricated. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers can't help you anymore." Ethan's voice cut through the crowd. "Because you're not the only victim." Diana stepped out from backstage. She had changed her appearance over the years. New face, new hair, new identity. But when she spoke, the room fell completely silent. "My name is Diana Mercer. I was Marcus Blackwell's first wife." She walked toward the stage, toward the man who had tried to kill her. 7 years ago, he beat me so badly I needed facial reconstruction surgery. Then he staged a car accident to murder me. Gasps from the crowd. Marcus's face went pale. "The drunk driver was paid $50,000 to run me off a cliff. The investigating officer was paid to close the case. Marcus thought he had killed me." Diana stopped at the foot of the stage. He was wrong. She held up photos, her old face, her new face, the hospital records, the financial transfers. "I've been waiting 7 years for this moment. 7 years of watching him hurt other women. 7 years of knowing the truth and being unable to prove it." She looked at Ethan, at the brother who had finally brought everything together. "But I'm not alone anymore." 2 more women stepped forward from the crowd. The NDA women, trembling but determined. "He broke my arm," one said. "Made me sign papers that said I would never tell anyone." "He gave me a concussion," the other added. "Paid me $2 million to stay quiet." The crowd was shifting now, moving away from Marcus, creating a circle of space around him. Marcus tried to leave, tried to push through the crowd toward an exit. Detective Cross stepped into his path. "Marcus Blackwell." She held up her badge. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder." His lawyer tried to intervene. Thomas Ashford pushed through the crowd. "My client has rights. This is illegal. You can't... Thais. Your client has the right to remain silent." Cross snapped handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. "I strongly suggest he uses it." The crowd parted. Officers appeared at the doors. Cameras flashed. The live stream counter showed 2 million viewers now. Marcus was led through the ballroom, past the people who had admired him, past the donors who had praised his generosity, past the society that had embraced him as one of their own. He turned his head, found Ethan in the crowd. His eyes were full of hatred, pure and burning. "This isn't over," he said. "You have no idea what you've started." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I do. I'm finishing it." The gala dissolved into chaos. Reporters swarmed. Guests demanded answers. Security tried to maintain order. But in the middle of it all, Ethan sat quietly in his wheelchair. Sam appeared beside him. "Diana, Dr. Holloway." "We did it," Sam said. "It's actually over." "Not over," Ethan replied. "Just beginning." He pulled out his phone. Called the hospital. "This is Ethan Mitchell. I need to check on my sister." The nurse's voice was excited. "Mr. Mitchell, we were just about to call you. She's waking up." Sunday morning, Portland General Hospital. Ethan had been at Caroline's bedside for 3 hours when her eyes finally opened. They were confused at first, unfocused, taking in the hospital room, the machines, the tubes. Then they found him. "Ethan?" Her voice was barely a whisper. rusty from disuse. I'm here. He took her hand. You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore. She blinked, processing. Then understanding flooded her face. Marcus, he's in custody, no bail. Oh, he's never going to hurt anyone again. Caroline's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, of relief, pure overwhelming relief. How? Ethan told her, about Diana, about Sam, about Dr. Holloway and Detective Cross, about the gala and the footage and the arrest that 2 million people had watched live. You did this, she whispered when he finished. My little brother, you saved me. I should have done it sooner. I should have seen the signs. I should have... Stop. Her hand squeezed his, weak but insistent. You couldn't have known. I didn't want you to know. I was protecting you. Protecting me? He threatened you. Said if I ever told anyone, he would make sure something happened to you. An accident. Her voice cracked. I couldn't let him hurt my little brother. Ethan felt the tears come. All this time, he had blamed himself for not seeing. And all this time, she had been trying to protect him. Mom would have wanted me to save you, he said. Mom would have been proud. Carolyn touched his face. Her fingers were gentle. I'm proud. They sat in silence, brother and sister, survivor and protector. The sun came through the window and painted patterns on the wall. John Kent. Dr. Holloway arrived at noon. She was smiling, really smiling for the first time since this ordeal began. I have good news, she said. The baby is strong. Heartbeat is perfect. We were worried about the stress, but she's a fighter. She? Caroline's hand went to her belly. A girl. 7 pounds at full term if you make it that far, which I believe you will. Caroline looked at Ethan. Her eyes were shining. A girl. I'm having a girl. Just like you wanted. She laughed. It was weak, broken, but it was real. I want to see her. The ultrasound. Dr. Holloway nodded. I'll arrange it. But first there's someone who wants to meet you. Diana entered the room. She looked different in the daylight, softer somehow, less guarded, like a weight had finally been lifted. Caroline, she approached the bed slowly. I'm Diana Mercer. I was Marcus's first wife. Caroline reached out her hand. Ethan told me about everything you did, everything you risked. Diana took her hand. 2 women, 2 survivors, meeting for the first time. He told me I was crazy, Diana said, that no one would believe me. I spent 7 years hiding, waiting for someone else to see the truth. I spent 3 years apologizing. Caroline's voice was steady. Making myself smaller, believing I deserved what he did to me. But you didn't. None of us did. No. Caroline squeezed Diana's hand. We didn't. They sat together. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was understanding, recognition, the bond of shared trauma and shared survival. What happens now? Carolyn asked. Now we testify, Diana said. Now we make sure he never does this to anyone else. Will the other women testify too? They already are. 3 more came forward after the gala. Women who had never told anyone before. Diana's voice was fierce with hope. He thought he could silence us with money and threats. He was wrong, Bumpty. The next few weeks were a blur. Marcus's arrest dominated the news. The footage from the gala was viewed over 50 million times. Every media outlet wanted interviews. Every talk show wanted the story. Diana emerged from hiding to tell her truth. The NDA women broke their contracts and faced the consequences willingly. More victims came forward. A pattern spanning 15 years was finally exposed. Marcus's empire crumbled. Business partners fled. Donors demanded refunds. Board members resigned. The golden reputation he had spent decades building turned to ash overnight. Nora Blackwell, his mother, released a statement disowning her son. The family name, 3 generations of old money respectability, was destroyed in a single news cycle. But for Ethan, none of that mattered as much as watching Caroline heal. She was released from the hospital 3 weeks after the gala, not to the mansion, that was evidence now, but to a small house near the coast that Diana helped her find. Ethan's apartment was nearby, close enough to visit every day. "I keep waiting to wake up and find out it's not real," Carolyn told him one afternoon. They were sitting on her porch, watching the ocean. "That he's still out there. He's in federal custody. No bail. Trial starts in 3 months. I know, but..." She touched her belly. 8 months now. Almost there. "I still check the locks 3 times before bed. That might never go away completely." "I know that too." She looked at him. "But I'm learning to live with it. To live, period." The waves crashed against the shore. Seabirds cried overhead. "Dr. Holloway says the baby is perfect," Caroline said. "Strong heartbeat. Good position. Ready to come whenever she wants. Have you thought about names?" Caroline was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. "I have one in mind, but I want to wait until she's here to be sure." They sat in comfortable silence, brother and sister, watching the ocean, breathing the salt air. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't filled with fear. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The footage, the medical records, the testimony of 5 women who had survived Marcus Blackwell's abuse. Diana took the stand and told her story. Calm, detailed, devastating. The NDA women broke their silence publicly. Their courage inspired others. By the end of the trial, 12 victims had come forward. Marcus's lawyers tried everything. Character assassination, technical objections, attempts to suppress evidence. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on 12 counts. 25 years to life. Marcus was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. He didn't look at anyone, didn't make a statement. The mask was finally, completely gone. Caroline didn't attend the sentencing. She was in the delivery room. The call came at 6:37 in the evening. Ethan was in his van, heading to the hospital, when Sam called. "She's in labor. Get here fast." He made it in 23 minutes, a new personal record. The waiting room was full of people. Diana, Dr. Holloway, Detective Cross, Sam, the women who had testified, the allies who had emerged from the shadows. All of them waiting, all of them hoping. Hours passed, the sun set, the city lights came on. At 11:42 p.m., a nurse appeared. "Mr. Mitchell, your sister is asking for you." Ethan wheeled himself down the hallway. His heart was pounding. The delivery room was quiet now. The chaos of birth had passed. What remained was peace. Caroline lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a bundle wrapped in pink. "Ethan," her voice was hoarse but happy, "come meet your niece." He wheeled close to the bed, looked at the tiny face emerging from the blanket. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's perfect." Caroline looked at him. Her eyes were full of tears. "I want you to be the first to know her name." "What is it?" Caroline smiled, the smile that had carried him through every difficult day of his life. "Grace, after Mom." Ethan felt the tears come, didn't try to stop them. Mom would have loved that. Mom would have loved her. Caroline touched the baby's face. "And she would have been so proud of you, Ethan. So incredibly proud." He reached out, touched his niece's tiny hand. Grace's fingers wrapped around his thumb, tiny but strong, holding on. "Welcome to the world, Grace," he said softly. "I'm your Uncle Ethan, and I'm going to protect you. Always." 3 months later, Ethan received a phone call. A reporter from the Washington Post, they wanted to do a profile on him. The disabled brother who had brought down a billionaire, the man everyone had underestimated. "Why did you hide your background?" the reporter asked during the interview. "Your years at the NSA, your technical expertise. Why let people think you were just a man in a wheelchair?" Ethan thought about this, about all the times people had looked at him and seen only the disability, the limitation, the weakness. "I didn't hide anything," he said finally. "People saw what they wanted to see. A man in a wheelchair who talks slow. They filled in the rest. But you could have corrected them." "Why?" "Underestimation is a weapon." He paused. "I just chose when to use it." The quote went viral. Disability advocates celebrated it. Others squirmed, recognizing their own assumptions. But Ethan didn't care about the attention, the recognition, the sudden fame. He cared about Caroline, about Grace, about the small house near the ocean where his family lived. He cared about the mornings when Grace wouldn't stop crying until she heard his voice on the phone, about the afternoons when Caroline laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. He cared about the women who had finally found their voices, the victims who had become survivors, the silence that had been broken forever. 1 year later, early morning. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. Ethan's hand reached for it automatically. His heart rate spiked. Old habits, old fears. "Hello? Uncle Ethan?" A woman's voice. Grace's babysitter. Laughing. "Sorry to call so late. Grace won't stop crying. Your sister says she only calms down when she hears your voice." The fear melted away, replaced by something warmer. He switched to video. There was Grace, red-faced and wailing, 1 year old now, loud and strong and full of life. "Hey there, little warrior," Ethan said slowly. "What's all this noise about?" Grace stopped crying, stared at the screen, reached for it with tiny fingers. Caroline appeared behind her, exhausted, happy, alive. "Thanks, little brother." "Any time, big sister," Grace babbled at the screen, incomprehensible but enthusiastic. "She's trying to tell you something," Caroline said. "I think she's saying she wants to go back to sleep. That makes two of us." They laughed. The easy laugh of family who had survived the worst and found their way back to each other. "Good night, Grace," Ethan said. "Good night, Caroline." "Good night, Ethan. Love you." "Love you too." The call ended. Ethan sat in his apartment, in his wheelchair, in a body that had never worked quite right, but his mind worked perfectly, and his heart was full. He thought about his mother, about the words she had repeated throughout his childhood. "Your body may be slower than others, but your mind is faster. Use what you have." He had used what he had, and he had won. Not just against Marcus, against every person who had ever looked at him and seen only weakness, against every voice that had told him he wasn't enough, against every doubt that had whispered that he couldn't make a difference. He had made a difference, and he would keep making differences. For Caroline, for Grace, for every person who felt invisible and powerless and alone. The bird outside his window was building a new nest. Second generation now. Life continuing. Ethan smiled, let himself feel the peace of it. Then he went back to sleep. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think, if it reminded you that strength comes in many forms, I would be so grateful if you could hit that like button. Your likes help this message reach someone who might need to hear it today. If you have thoughts about this story, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Your words matter to me. And if you want more stories like this, stories about courage, justice, and the power of never giving up, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they are stronger than they know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening until the end. Final statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring meaningful lessons and valuable insights to our audience. Every story we create is crafted with purpose, designed not just to entertain, but to inspire, educate, and remind you of the strength that lives within all of us. Thank you for trusting us with your time. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never underestimate yourself.